Hey everyone, this is Evan at Stryd. Welcome back to another Stryd for the Love of Running webinar. Today we're going to be talking about comparing power duration curves on stryd.com/power center. Before I get into things, if you're watching live, please feel free to subscribe on our YouTube channel. Please also feel free to drop any comments that you have while you're watching. Along the way. We will get to those at the end. We always reserve a segment for your questions. Like I said, today we're going to be comparing power duration curves on Power Center. So let's hop into it. I'm going to go through this semi-quick presentation, and then we are going to do some live analysis of the same sort of considerations that we're talking about here. What is the power duration curve? We've had a couple segments on this recently talking about exploring the power duration curve, as well as some Stryd guide videos, which you can find on our Instagram TV page, or if you go to stryd.com/guide, you can find the most up-to-date version of this guide that we are continuously building. We've been focusing recently on the power duration curve, and I always want to reiterate a few key concepts just so everybody's on the same page and we have some understanding about how to use the power duration curve and how to look at it. On your left-hand side, the y-axis, you'll have your watts, and on the x-axis, or the bottom of the graph, you'll have duration. So it is literally power and duration. We can start to plot the relationship between the power you can hold for a certain amount of duration and look at these trends and have a more complete understanding of your ability as a runner. So it's important to understand the power duration curve when analyzing your current fitness, or like we're going to talk about today, comparing and analyzing your fitness over time and your performances over time. So making sure you're aware of the power duration curve and you're aware of how to look at it and analyze it. Let's talk about a couple different things about the power duration curve, specifically in stryd.com/power center. Where can you find it? You can go to stryd.com/power center, scroll down, and it's right there on the top of the main page on Power Center. You can find your regular running profile, your zones, your 2 most recent runs, your My Training chart, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks from now. But the power duration curve is the sort of mainstay on your homepage on Power Center. The default display for the power duration curve is going to default to the last 90 days. And we think that 90 days is a good way to illustrate some short-term trends as well as some longer-term trends of your fitness. The run age is an important thing to know here. So the power duration curve is made up of what seems to be a little bit broken up lines here. The blue, light blue color is made up of runs that are between 1 and 30 days old. The sort of mid-green color is 31 to 75 days old, and the gray color is 76 to 90 days old. So it's important to not only understand the relationship of your power duration curve, but also when are these activities actually happening over the last 90 days. Again, 90 days is the default. For me, like I'll talk about in a little bit, it's important for me to understand where certain areas of my power duration curve are actually coming from. And so the run age section is a great way to make sure you fully understand the segment in your power duration curve as well. The model curve. The model curve is the next important thing to know. You can turn this on if you go to your power duration curve. The AutoCP model curve is an easy toggle on. When you do toggle it on, it'll overlay a white power duration curve over the top, usually, of your regular power duration curve that defaults in the last 90 days. We're going to talk about the use cases of using your model curve over time, but it's important to know your current ability when we're referencing the default power duration curve. So always being aware of the run age and the AutoCP model curve. If you have any questions about these, there's these very, very helpful information icons that appear in Power Center on the regular power duration curve as well as the AutoCP model curve that you can click on, and it'll give you more information about that specifically. Next, we have drop-down comparisons. So like I said, it defaults to 90 days, but we can explore some of the different trends in different time periods. So the sort of preset values that we have are the last 30 days, 90 days, last 6 months, 12 months, all of X year. So I've had data going all the way back to 2018. So I can look at my data from 2020, 2019, 2018. I can look at an all-time power duration curve for my all-time bests. And I can also set a custom range. This drop-down is good to get familiar with as we talk more about the power duration curve and comparing things over time. So let's actually look at a couple examples of my power duration curve. I'm going to show a couple screenshots here with some orange boxes calling out some certain areas, but then I'm going to hop into stryd.com/power center as well and kind of analyze this and show you what I would look for when I'm analyzing a power duration curve. So this section specifically to me is important to look at to understand how the last month of my training is going. Where am I sort of hitting right on my model curve? Where am I maybe falling a little bit short? Right now I can see that I meet up with my model curve from 11 minutes, right about at 11 minutes, all the way to 25 minutes in line with the model. This, to me, comes from a recent 5K time trial that I did, which is in line with my ability of what the model curve thinks I could do, as well as a little bit longer tempo run. I did a 5-mile tempo pretty recently, and that was pretty much right in line with my model curve as well. So that's refreshing to see. The other sort of points that I do see here, again, I'll explore a little bit more and show you some more functionality. But on the left-hand side, I'm doing a pretty good job at meeting my expectations for this short intensity, right around 10 to 20 seconds around there. I have a little bit of a lag from about 40 seconds to a minute. We can see that this same activity is contributing for this whole section here, but I definitely know that I can fill in this gap a little bit. The other sort of trend that I see outside of me just meeting my model curve is this gap as we go past about 25 minutes. So I could stand to maybe do a 10K time trial, an 11K time trial, maybe even just a 40-minute time trial at my modeled ability to start to fill out my curve. The last 90 days, again, this is the sort of preset value that you'll see in Power Center, and we can start to analyze the trends. If you look at your last 30 days, it is going to show you all of that data in the last 90 days as well. So what we're looking at for the 30 compared to the 90 is actually the difference between those 2 months outside of just your last 30 days. So it's important to be able to understand not only the efforts as they are best, but also maybe some of the frequency of those efforts as well. So I mentioned that, talking specifically about this section here on the right, where I have a large number of separate activities from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, but they're all submaximal. But I do have a variety of activities here. You can see these breaking points in my power duration curve, which tells me that I have about 5 activities here that are contributing to this section of the power duration curve that still fall on a pretty good line, but I still haven't met my modeled ability here. Again, talking about this recent effort, this was about a week ago. I did a 5K time trial on the track. This is going to fill in the 90 days the same way it did in the 30 days. So this is good that it's still meeting my modeled ability. And again, I have this large gap from about 30 seconds to 1 minute, and that's something that still holds over the last 90 days. So I might look for differences between the last 30 days, the last 90 days, and I might be able to see that, 2 months ago, 60 days ago, I actually did run a good sort of minute time trial, but that's not the case here. So this is showing me some gaps in my power duration curve that I might want to take into consideration. Let's look at a little bit longer here. So in the last 6 months, this activity is about to fall off. Actually, the longer race effort from February that's still hanging around, this was on February 29th, I exceeded my modeled ability after I crossed an hour, and I really haven't done anything in the last 6 months besides this one sort of race effort. So this might tell me that, hey, it might be good for me to target a half marathon. It might be good for me to target maybe a 10-mile race, maybe something between 10 to 15 miles. So this is a sort of eye-opening thing for me that in the past 6 months, that was my longest effort, really over an hour. Really over, because we can see this gray line here. We can see this all comes from about 25 minutes and on. It's all the same activity. So I really haven't done anything high intensity longer than 25 minutes in the past 6 months versus the activity 6 months ago. So this is eye-opening to me to see my training trends. The thing that I do appreciate from this is I can actually see that in the last 6 months, the most recent 5K time trial I did, this is actually contributing the most recently, and it's the best effort that I've done in 6 months, which is sort of what I'm focusing on now. I'm not necessarily in the bulk of marathon training or racing. I'm focusing on some of the shorter time trials and some of the shorter track stuff right now. So this is sort of refreshing to see, but it opens my eyes a little bit more than just looking at the last, say, 90 days would. In the last year, I can look at some of the key differences here, specifically between my last 12 months and my last 6 months. I feel like I still did a good job at targeting short hills. I met my modeled ability here on the very left-hand side. And then, like we were talking about earlier, how in my last, about 90 days, 30 days even, I really have a big gap from 30 seconds to 1 minute. But we can see that in the last year, I was doing some training where I did hit my model around 1 minute. And so to me, that means that there is absolutely still that ability. I just have to show it, and I just have to use Stryd for that. The other thing I have here is a medium duration activity above my current model, right at about the 15 and a half minute mark. But that is something I did more than 90 days ago. And if we get into Power Center, we can actually see exactly where that activity comes from, as well as a few longer 40+ minute activities all above my current model. We can also look at the year-by-year stuff. So if I click all of 2019, I can see all of 2019 on a model curve. Apologize the noise outside very briefly. But we can start to see some of these specific breakdowns, and I really have this full sort of customization. And again, custom duration, this is a training block. So I mentioned I raced a marathon at the end of February in 2020. I did not incorporate any short, high-intensity work. We can see I had this huge gap at 10 seconds. I had maybe some good little spurts above 500 watts. But as we get to the 10-second mark, I can see that I have barely any intensity. I'm falling way below my model. And some people might say, oh, you're training for a marathon, but you're not necessarily incorporating that high intensity stuff. You don't need to because you're training for a long distance event. I'm still of the mindset that it is important to incorporate that stuff. And that is something that I've changed in my training recently, as we could see from the 30-day example, we can see from the 90-day example. I do incorporate these short hills or these short, fast pieces of running. The other sort of thing, takeaway that my training really does incorporate is some short, medium intensity. This is something I always feel comfortable with, whether it's a 5K time trial, up to 5 mile, pretty solid tempo run. I did have a better medium duration intensity, and the other thing I had was one very long endurance run. I did a about 3-hour run. I think this was 23 miles, 24 miles, something like that. So I did have this sort of piece that stands out that you won't see in a lot of my other training too. So this is something that I find very, very helpful if you have a certain date in mind of when you start and finish past training blocks. That being able to compare this over time is very, very helpful. It's a very big key to not only planning your next training, but having the information of what you have done and maybe what you can improve. We all the time get so entrenched in just the day-to-day, we lose sight of how that whole training block works as a whole piece. But using the power duration curve for a custom duration, like being able to analyze the training block, really gives you that information very quickly, I should add as well. So let's compare. I'm actually going to jump into stryd.com/power center, and give me one moment here as I stop this, and then I'm going to share my other screen here. And then I think, yeah, there we go. Thank you so much. One moment here. And then I would like to plug it as I'm sort of getting into this too. If anybody has any questions along the way, please feel free to continue to send them to us as well. So like I mentioned, we get dropped in immediately to the profile here, and we can see the power duration curve. So let's start to play around with this and understand a little bit more. So like I mentioned, important things to know are the default, the last 90 days, the run age, showing the difference between these recent activities versus some of the activities that are a little bit older, as well as turning on this model. So let's give a comparison between the last 30 days and the last 90 days. So I press last 30 days here, and it overlays the white line that is the AutoCP model curve. I can continue to turn this on or off, but then I can see the difference and the date range here. So let me see some of the examples that I had to compare. So yeah, 30-day versus 90-day, and I'll give some of my quick highlights here. A lot of my stuff is coming from the last 30 days. If we're talking about the contribution all the way up to about a minute, I maybe had a couple other intervals that were a couple watts higher in this 4-minute range, something like that. And maybe one thing I have been missing is a little bit higher intensity long run. So maybe I'm a little bit curious about what this blue line is from the last 90 days that I haven't done in the past 30 days. I can simply click to pin it, and then I can click on view run. It'll actually pull up that exact run, so I can understand maybe if I'm going to start planning training again, and I want to maybe keep that consistently that I had in that consistency that I had in the past 90 days. I can start to incorporate that. So this tells me that, oh yes, I do remember I did a 4-mile warm up in my easy zone. As we can see, the zone breakdown here was 95% zone 1, and then I did 10 miles in the moderate zone, with a little bit in zone 3, maybe a little bit high intensity at the end as I crossed over critical power. So this was something that I did in the last 90 days, but I really haven't incorporated it in the past month. So that is something that is very, very important for me to understand. Let's look at the last 30 days versus the last 12 months here. So like I mentioned, being able to be familiar with these drop-down tabs lets you have this full sort of customization as well. And then if you ever want to reset things back, you can just reset it there. So looking at the last 30 days, again, I've had over the past year, in my last 30 days, I've done the best hill repeat session that I've ever done, which is something that I'm really proud of. Like I mentioned, that was something I didn't necessarily incorporate in my training block for my marathon from last February, but this is something that I'm incorporating now, and I definitely feel a lot faster. We can see that overall in the last 12 months, I have had certain sections that do surpass where my ability is now. So if I click on the model curve, maybe right around a minute to 85 seconds, I did a 500-meter time trial that I can click into, and I can see all of this data here. So I can see specifically where I have these activities sort of contributing. And I think this was yes, this was a very, very windy day. I do remember this very, very well. Starting out this time trial, I jogged about 100 meters. And then I started out, I ended up being, really, really happy with this time trial, but I had a huge, huge gust of wind just in my face on this home stretch of the track before I finished on the back stretch to get the wind at my back for the last little bit. But we can see this section here, and I can kind of go in and say, oh yeah, I ran, about 78 to 80 seconds for a 500 meter, which I was very happy with. And that remains my best effort over the past year. all the way from 57 seconds all the way to about 90 seconds. So that is powerful for me to understand. I can also analyze here the sort of differences that I have seen over these sections in that medium high intensity. So from 10 to 15 minutes, I did a race last November called the Pumpkin Pie 5K. It was a 5K road race. And I can click into here and view my race data. So I do think it's very important to make sure you tag this stuff as well, because this helps these specific types of comparisons. Because if I go back here and I click on here, I know exactly what the race is. I don't have to really guess. I can remember this medium tempo run last week that I did very, very easily and clearly because I specifically tagged the activity. So we can see that based on the splits here, I had a 5-mile progression run over a relatively hilly loop as well. So I can click into here and I can view this. And this is actually my best over the last 30 days, all the way up to, say, about 25 minutes, 26 minutes, something around there. So very, very powerful sort of comparison. The other sort of comparison that I'd say here is I really haven't raced a longer effort. I have a half marathon that contributes all the way from my 26.5 minutes all the way up to about 70 minutes. And that was the Houston Half Marathon that I ran. And then again, I have this marathon that I did in February, as well as another marathon. So it's very, very good to be able to compare that stuff. Let's just reset the view here. And I'm going to look at the next consideration. Let's say I want to compare some of my historical data from 2018 versus 2019. And I can wait for this to load as it looks at all my activities from these periods. I definitely ran a lot. So I give the system a little bit to work through. But the trends I'm going to kind of look for here are, again, how do I compare over these really short distances versus how do I compare with the sort of longer efforts here. So I'm just going to give this a quick reset. I'm going to load up all of 2018. I'm going to wait for this to load. Then I'm going to load up all of 2019 as well. I'm going to check and see if we do have any questions that have been passed here. The first one I see is, why does the AutoCP model curve stop at 90 minutes? I would like to compare actual versus modeled for longer times. Right now, our modeled curve just looks at your 90 minutes, as that is relevant to the critical power modeling. And so we would have the ability potentially in the future to consider adding something for the longer duration, but for the current situation and the kind of current considerations that we look at, 90 minutes is where we cap it, just because that is how it is relevant to critical power. Let's see. I am going to go back and jump in here because it looked like it loaded, and I'm going to load up 2019. I'm going to see if I can tackle one other question while I wait for this to load as well. Let's see, how to maintain and use power duration curve in AutoCP in an environment with rapidly changing temperatures and humidity. I think this is a great question, and I think that there are a couple tools out there that definitely help with understanding your ability in different environments, specifically for temperature and humidity. Myself, I tend to be pretty sensitive to when it gets very warm, and then I tend to be pretty good, and I tend to perform pretty well when it does cool down a little bit, and when it does switch to some nicer weather there. I'm just going to give this a quick reset as well. I would say in most cases, you want to understand how rapidly changing your temperature and humidity is. So for some people, a 5-degree or 10-degree Fahrenheit swing might be pretty severe, but I don't know necessarily the specifics. If we're talking about having a extreme detrimental impact to performance, I would imagine something like a 30-degree Fahrenheit swing, maybe from like 50 degrees to 80 degrees Fahrenheit would be something that would be applicable for this. Maintaining the power duration curve, you have to remember, though, if we're looking at the same sort of variables, that's when we can start to make direct comparisons. If we're talking about maintaining the best auto-calculated critical power, to me, it makes sense to maybe exclude an activity that you had. Maybe, let's say somebody was traveling and all of a sudden they were running in really, really cold weather versus the normal hot temperature, and they don't want maybe that new high power activity to contribute to their AutoCP when they go back. Maybe you exclude that out of consideration. I would absolutely say potentially looking at the superpower calculator for changing some of the variables around, for whether it's altitude or elevation, whether the temperature and humidity changes. That could give you a good sort of estimates for how you could be able to change your workouts if your environment is really rapidly changing as well. Another thing that I did pretty recently for my time trial for the 5K again was specifically the day before the race, the day of the race even, I got my last minute sort of projection by entering the temperature and humidity for race day. So I had kind of left things in the ideal conditions around 50 some degrees Fahrenheit and maybe around 60% humidity. It ended up being about 90% humidity and about 70 degrees. So my projection definitely slowed down a little bit, and my power went down a little bit as well. But I was able to adjust things using the Stryd race calculator in Power Center as well as in the mobile app. So I think that was a great tool for me. So I'm able to use that specifically to adjust in sort of the rapidly changing environments. Let's see. Okay, looks like everything loaded too. So we can start to look at different year comparisons as well. So again, this is 2018 versus 2019. 2019 is going to be this purple line. 2018 is going to be this blue line. We can see in 2018, I had a lot longer high intensity run above 2 hours, and this was actually a marathon that I ran. So I can click into that. Whoops, looks like it needs a quick refresh. So I can click into the race and I can start to see some of the different considerations and some of the different things there. And then I can do the same thing if I were to say, let me look at 2019 versus 2020. Maybe I want to just view my all-time personal best as well. And this is something that I do enjoy taking a look at, and I do enjoy being able to sort of review those sort of personal bests over time while using Stryd. I think that is something that is very fun to compare. And I can actually see, again, that in the past 30 days, Tuesday, July 21st, I had my best ever about 6-second all the way up to 25-second power. So it's a great sort of visualization just of your ability over time. And I can see the different races that I have done here as well as the longest sort of duration that I've been able to do. I'm going to stop streaming on this one, and I'm going to reshare my presentation tab here. And now we can look at some of the takeaways. So specifically for the takeaways, we want to make sure that you take home some points that you really feel resonate from the stuff we talked about. So being able to compare past training blocks against each other using the power duration curve. If you go to your Power Center, you go to your Stryd mobile app, you should be able to make a note of when you've started training. Again, this is an important thing for tagging or renaming your runs. You can make sort of these notes to yourself and be able to compare things over time. Like I showed the example of comparing my November 1st, 2019 through my February 29th, 2020 training block, training for a marathon. I was able to see that I had a pretty poor ability around a minute, from 30 seconds to a minute. I really didn't incorporate any of those short high intensity hills that I've now been incorporating. I had a pretty good medium duration, medium intensity with some 5K time trials. But I didn't really do that much hard tempo running. I did have a pretty good long endurance run, but it was a pretty low intensity run. So that's something I was able to garner that information from, specifically being able to compare training blocks. You want to make sure that you're able to use the model curve to compare current capability versus your historical bests. Again, knowing that you can toggle on and off the model curve and compare different time periods, as well as compare different training blocks, it's important to understand your current ability versus your past ability, as well as analyzing training blocks to see how your historical power duration curve was shaped. I think that's the most fun thing. Again, I like looking at the all-time personal bests and being able to understand whether, in the past 30 days, have I done something, in the past 90 days, have I done something that's contributed to my all-time best with Stryd. To me, that is the most fun thing about the power duration curve, is being able to really take the data into your own hands and being able to compare those efforts over time. Let me check in and see if there are any other questions. Please touch on comparing power across different weight setting periods. Afraid to change my Stryd weight. Don't want to lose my baseline. I want to be able to compare future and past runs. I would say that for most cases, I have not changed my Stryd weights. If you do that, potentially making a note of a weight change and being able to look at it in the watts per kilogram would be the thing to do. If we have a more thorough and complete answer, we can definitely follow up in the next webinar and make a point to specifically answer that. It looks like that is all the questions that we do have. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Remind people that you can go to stryd.com if you do not currently have Stryd. Stryd is in stock and shipping. We are looking forward to continuing this series, and we are really looking forward to bringing the stryd.com/guide to a more fully fleshed version of what it is now. Your feedback in that development is very, very helpful, very, very crucial, and we've really enjoyed people's response to that. I'd also like to plug the YouTube channel and the Instagram account if you'd like to follow for more education specifically around power-based training and using Stryd specifically. So that wraps it up for today's webinar. We will be back next week with a new Stryd guide video, as well as another webinar next week. So I hope everybody is staying safe and healthy, enjoying the running, and we will see everybody